All right, welcome everyone to week 7 of our discussion of Rod Dreher's book, The Benedict Option. Glad to have you with us again this week. And I will ask Marty to get us started in prayer, please.
Sure. Father in heaven, thank you that you are a God who has made us in your image. And Lord, you have made us for relationship with yourself and with one another. Lord, use our conversation this morning that we might consider how it is to come together in service to you, to encourage and support one another, to spur one another on to love and good deeds. And Lord, in a way that you ultimately receive the glory for all of it. Through Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right, so this week we're going to talk a little bit more about what it means to live in Christian community, what it means to try to create and build and sustain Christian community. So it's a tough topic, and I think one of the things that may be kind of tough about it is there's certainly some principles that we're going to follow, and hopefully we'll kind of tease some of those out as we have the discussion. But it looks different in different times and different places. There's no one formula to follow necessarily to make this look the way that it should, and so that's what we're going to kind of deal with today. So I'm going to start with this question. Are there ways to make home and possibly school a quote-unquote monastery without becoming so controlling or isolated that we exasperate our children and even have an effect opposite of what is intended? Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to start with, referencing a phrase that he uses throughout the chapters. He talks about the domestic monastery. And, what he's referencing is putting the life of Christ first and foremost in your family and not apologizing for that. And creating this monastery, so to speak, not like physically, but understanding that in order for you to exist with the world, you have to create this domestic monastery, which puts the life of Christ as the most important thing in your family and not apologize for it. So that means it's a orientation that has order and it has structure and it has rules, but not to the sense of they're oppressive, but more the sense of these are the rules that are going to guide us. These are going to guide us forward. It's really more of a vision proactive form of living, and understanding. And I that resonated with me because I think I'm a big advocate of being proactive and not reactive. And I tell our people all the time at our school, don't react, because when you react in emotion to the situation, and that's what drives everything. Be proactive, understand our vision, put our vision first, and that guides you forward. And I think that's kind of what he's talking about here as far as forming this domestic monastery with your family and in your home, so that can kind of protect you from all that's going to come at you from the world.
Okay. So that kind of deals with the first part of what we're talking about here. Marty, I'll ask you, I guess, for the second part is, so how do we do what he just said without becoming, controlling or isolationists or exasperating our children, that sort of thing, and thus sort of producing the opposite of what we intend?
Well, I think a few things come to mind. First, Craig touched on this, is being focused on the positive. That really the purpose is to walk with Christ, to know Christ, to walk with him, to worship him, to bear witness to him, to be a disciple of his, to be instrumental in the discipleship of others that he's bringing to himself. So I would say the first thing is the positive. And I don't think anybody can entirely encapsulate into a monastery. I don't even think you could back then.
Right.
Hundreds of years ago. So I think we do want to come into the part about not being controlling. I think what we sometimes fall into is thinking, I need to make sure that I keep the monastery clean, that I keep the monastery pure, and the monastery can be, home, our families. It can have to do with, interaction. What are our church members doing? But I think you always got to realize that we're not out of the world yet, like Paul says. So there's no way that we can ever completely go into an isolated monastery. So maybe coming back to your question was, how do you do it without being overbearing? I think we always want to be focusing on the positive. What are we called to do? I think that we want to be encouraging, our families, our church members, that our goal is to walk with Christ, and that's going to mean that we're going to look different than the world around us, but it won't mean that we have no contact with. We may get into this more in one of the questions about friends, but is it true?
The TV show Friends, or
no,
just,
not that.
okay.
No, that's the well.
I think you're branching out from your domestic monastery.
If you're yeah, but that we just don't want to go there. But it's so he talks about how culture and peer groups and all can actually have an effect to undermine what we're trying to do in the monastery. But we better be in the monastery, as it were, in our homes and our churches. There does have to be some degree of inoculation, as it were, immunization, and developing spiritual health, so that we can function in the world out there. So if what we're saying is always the no's and the negatives, and trying to keep people away from things, I think that's where we become exasperating and controlling. Whereas if we're, and I think we also want to, this is where Craig mentioned this earlier when we were off camera, that monasteries often were built around a rule, like the Benedictine rule, and maybe there were 10 things, 20 things, 30 things. I think we always want to make sure that we're focusing on biblical rule, so that we're not because it can come across to our children or other people as arbitrary, and when they think that it's arbitrary, it becomes frustrating.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see in Scripture, Paul references it in Galatians 6:2, is bear one another's burdens and taking your mind off of you and putting it on other people. And I think that's one of the things I like the phrase monastery mindset, because that's really what he's kind of advocating is to live in the world. You have to build in your family this monastery mindset where Scripture's your guide. Christ is who you walk with. And even when you're out in public, even when you're over here doing something else, it's this mindset, it's this vision that this is what guides your life, not all the things that fly at you. And so I get the sense that it's a monastery mindset that he's advocating that we build into our families, into ourselves.
Yeah. So I think, uses a couple of examples in this chapter that's helpful to try to illustrate this. So one is a really negative example. So he talks about this young lady who he interviewed in her 20s, I believe, had grown up in a homeschool family, but a very strict, very isolated and closed off homeschool, fundamentalist Christian family. She describes them even as people who are big into conspiracy theories and all sorts of things like that. And in this family, they were completely cut off from everyone else, even some of their own extended family members. If they weren't in lockstep with them on everything, they just shut those people out completely. And those people were all viewed with suspicion. They were the enemy, they were the world, whatever. And your goal in life was to keep yourself isolated and pure from all these other things. And it, of course, drove her crazy. And as soon as she was able to get out of it, she did and wanted nothing to do with it, and became an atheist into her 20s. And she sort of predicted that her younger siblings that were coming up behind her were probably going to wind up in the same boat, or were already starting to do that. And so that's a really negative example. I think about that one, because we homeschool at our house, and you have to be really careful about your motivations. Whenever people come and talk to me about, well, tell me more about homeschooling, because they're thinking about it, particularly lately because of all the stuff with schools and COVID and everything else. A lot more people are thinking about homeschooling. And
Craig would say, don't homeschool.
Right.
Send them over
Send them
to our school.
That's right. Because he's got all these
next
openings,
chapter
right?
we'll talk about education.
Yeah, that's true. That's coming up. You have no openings though, right, as I understand?
Not in the grammar school.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, so there are people coming and asking this question, and the first thing I start asking them about, what's your motivation behind it? Sometimes when I talk to people about it, it's because they're just afraid of what's out there.
Right.
And they don't want their kids exposed. And again, I understand that to some degree. To some degree, I share that motivation. But at the same time, you can't completely control it. I think I told the story a couple weeks ago of one of my kids who's just out playing with the neighborhood kids and came home and said, well, so-and-so down the street said that 2 women can get married. And this was to my 9-year-old, I think, is the one who said this. And so, then we have that conversation. And so there's just, unless you really do what she talked about in this chapter of even isolate yourself from the kids in the neighborhood or whatever else it is, you just can't keep that stuff out. And the reality is, even when you try to have those extreme measures, you still can't keep it all out.
Well, we years ago, we had our kids in Christian education at the time, and there were things going on with some of the kids in the Christian school that we knew about that were not going to be good. It actually moved up the timetable in our family of when we had certain conversations with our kids, to say, hey, here, facts of life talks, but then also there's certain things that you may have people mention, or you may run into ideas or behavior, and this is the way you need to look at it biblically. So, I had a friend years ago say, if your kid gets marooned on a desert island, then that'll be a sinful environment on that desert island.
Yeah.
And that's, sometimes what we have done is we've tried in families where we care about our kids and we mean well, but what we've done is we've tried to make sure, that we've isolated them from any kids that are going to undermine what we're trying to do, from any online, television, media, whatever it is, that would be contrary. And the reality is they're eventually going to run into those kind of things.
Yeah. I think when we talk about Christian education or Christian homeschooling, you can only isolate your kids to a certain point, and then the world's going to they're going to run into the world. And so what we talk about at our school is, it's not that we're going to present you heaven on earth. It's that what you're looking for is how the school or how you are going to respond to the sin that your kids run into. And that's the key for us. And that's the key for our family, key for our school is our response. We want to make sure it's biblical. We want to make sure it's rooted in Scripture, because that's what God gave us to live by. And so that's our goal. And I think that is more your battle than anything.
Well, and the Scriptures, to sort of summarize it, define the big dangers as the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? So even if you somehow successfully isolated the world completely out, you still have your own heart to deal with.
And someone else who's pulling your heart in a direction that it doesn't need to go.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big thing. And then, to your earlier points, I do think it's really important for us to define ourselves primarily by what we're for, not what we're against. I've probably heard me say that several times at this point. But I think that is really important. And I think some of these groups that become so isolationists, they largely define themselves by what they're against.
Right.
And that really becomes the danger, because then the focus is really negative and everything seems really frightening, instead of believing that we're part of an institution, the church, against which the gates of hell themselves cannot prevail. Right. It's the opposite notion, not that the gates of hell are going to come in and corrupt us, but that we're going out and defeating the gates of hell through the power of Christ and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And those are two very different mindsets.
Yeah, and I think the other thing he brings out is the intentionality of living out your faith. Is that if you're going to live by your emotions and reactions, you're going to tend to respond to the world according to worldly ways. I mean, there is a point where you have to teach your children that faith is sometimes an intentional action that you're not going to want to do, but you have to do. It's the idea of conscience. It's the idea of the common good. It's the idea of morality working its way out and manifesting as your life. There's things that are not going to feel good, but are good, and the only way you will live those things out is with intentionality and discipline. And I think that is also part of what he's fleshing out here.
Just some kind of tangible things that did strike me as I was reading, and especially these sad cases of people that grew up in homes where they were sheltered and then ultimately rebelled or even apostatized. And of course, we know ultimately that if they truly had been converted, if they truly belonged to Christ, they wouldn't have turned away. Humanly speaking, those homes maybe didn't help in ways, but we all grew up in imperfect homes. Some of us grew up in non-Christian homes. In fact, the majority of us at the table grew up in non-Christian homes. And I guess nominally Christian, not at all Christian, faithful Christian home. But and the Lord brought us to Christ. But coming back to about, not provoking, a couple things came to mind in Ephesians and Colossians. Fathers, don't exasperate or provoke your children. Don't provoke your children to anger lest they be discouraged. And I think we can get very concerned that we need to protect them from bad things, but that becomes just oppressive to a kid who wants to have some fun. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the fun is okay. We're just afraid of what might happen. And of course we grew up at a time, and Tim, I'm guessing you did too. We went out the door in the morning and roamed for hours. Our parents had no idea where we were. And most of the stuff that we were around was completely fine and wholesome. Mm-hmm. And occasionally you got a little banged up. Once in a while you had to go get stitched. And that was it, and we were fine. And so I think that one thing that in general with our kids, and I'm thinking about parenting now, we need to look for ways to say yes, not make them feel that we don't want them to feel like they're in this environment where their parents are suspicious of everybody. Mom and dad wear tinfoil hats, think the world is dirty, and won't let them do anything. We need to look for ways to say yes. Mm-hmm. We need to realize that, what we might want to do as a 40-year-old is not what our 10-year-old wants to do. Right. That they don't want to do that. They want to go play, or they want to be able to do some stuff with their friends. And if that's appropriate, we ought to look for ways to say yes, not have the default be no because something bad might happen. Mm-hmm. And I think another thing that he notes that I think is great is we need to apologize to our kids when we because they're going to see us mess up too. Even if we keep them away from everything else out there, there's plenty of stuff in our homes that's not good too. And including mom and dad will sin, and we need to apologize to them. And I think one other thing I'll say that struck me, kind of reading between the lines, is we need to not shut them down every time they question what we might be teaching them at home, but we need to engage with them and have a discussion about it, because it is very exasperating to a child when you just say, well, I can't even believe you'd ask that question. And I'll repeat because I said so. Now, sometimes you have a kid who just wants to argue. We had only one of our four. I'm kidding, but
wow, that's pretty good.
But no. But one of them, one time that it was clear the argument. He just wasn't going to quit arguing, and then it became a case of son, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are we clear? And I better hear two words. You need to think long and hard before you say them. Are we clear? And he kind of thought for a few seconds. He said, "Yes, sir." And I was like, "Good answer." And so that has to happen sometimes, but most of the time, what we would communicate to our kids is if you respectfully and honestly ask us questions, we're going to talk about those questions. Mm-hmm. And so not just saying, that's a worldly question. How could you even ask that? Because they were asking questions we've all asked.
Yeah. I hope our homes will embrace questions, because God is the great answer provider. He provides answers to us.
Yeah. So I think that's the flip side. So we bring up the other positive example that he uses in this chapter is, okay, so you had that one family that isolated and was afraid, and conspiracy theories and all that. And then he talked about his own home that he grew up in, where his family and it sounded like his father was really a big impetus behind this, was very hospitable. They're always inviting people in. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really great way. We talk about how to be a witness, how to affect the world in positive ways, inviting them into your own home. Again, a pretty monastic idea, I think, is what he brings in. So that we have our own thing and our own rules and our own structures within our home, but you're welcome to come in and be a part of it and come have dinner, and we're going to laugh and be silly and all these other things. And he viewed that as a really positive example within his own home.
I think that is a reference to this idea of monastery, because the Benedictine monastery allowed people to come in. But again, when you came into the monastery, you came on their terms. Mm-hmm. Same with your home. You invite people in, not that you oppress them with all these rules, but they're now in your home and they can see how you live. And that is a testimony in some ways.
Yeah, good. All right, so we'll get on to the next question here. How do we help our children pick their peers wisely and selectively, and even learn to be nonconformists when they must be?
I think that begins with and they have to embrace this conviction, but that they are called to walk with Christ themselves. And what I think that when a young person or an adult truly comes to the conviction that they've been saved by grace through faith and they're called to walk with Christ, they start to really, frankly, select their friends differently. And so I'm going to be a little anecdotal now. If I think about my own experience and watching my kids, is in my own experience, non-Christian home, non-Christian friends. When I was converted, I would prioritize looking for Christian friends. And I had Christian friends and non-Christian friends. But some of the non-Christian friends, it quickly became for me just a no-brainer of, look, I'm not going to go do that with you. And if you're going to go do that, I'll see you Monday morning. But I'm not going to go do that this weekend. And so that in a lot of ways took care of itself. And then with our children, even very young, I remember with some of them noting, we would say things like, "Was that a Christian family?" And sometimes they'd say, "Yeah, they seem to be a committed Christian family." And I'm talking like even kindergarten. I remember asking one of the kids, "Are they a Christian family?" And Eliza, my daughter, who was like kindergarten, first grade, said, "They say they're Christian, I'm not sure." Now, that's not because she was a little judgmental, 5-year-old or whatever, but she was already realizing there are people who say they're Christians, but they're not necessarily. And then what we observed kind of with all of our kids, as they at different points became more committed in their walk with Christ, they started deliberately picking and choosing their friends, and we really didn't have to worry about who they were picking as friends. So I guess the question is, how do you help them cultivate? And I think it, again, begins with the positive. They need to know who they are, and that they're really seeking to walk with Christ. Obviously, when they're 3, we got a lot more control. But again, even if they're in Christian school, wherever they are, when they're 15, 16 years old, you don't have the same control over who they're hanging out with and who they're having contact with. But if they really have a clear identity of who they are in Christ, then they're going to pretty deliberately pick their own friends. And a lot of the time, they'll even make decisions, just say, "You know what, I can't hang out with that guy or that girl or that group because of what they're about." So this last thing, years ago, talking to a lady that the Lord had saved and brought out of lesbianism, and she was now married. She had a family, and I was talking to her because of a counseling situation. But she said to me, "Look, Pastor, when I was converted and then really began to grow in my walk with Christ, I didn't have to separate myself from any of my old friends. They all ditched me." And I think that's some of that. Again, if our children are really growing in their walk with Christ, a lot of those things start to naturally take care of themselves. I'm not saying we don't need to give them counsel, and especially on the earlier end, a lot of the time we have to help them and say, "Look, you really think this is somebody you can be close friends with? Do you think do you think that you got to set some limits on where this friendship can go?" But with all of them, what we observed was at a certain point, that was just no longer an issue. They were picking their own friends. They were doing it wisely.
I would agree with Marty. I think I'm pretty proud of my kids because they've picked good friends over the course of time. But I think that has a lot to do with, some of the things Marty referenced, being in a family that is Christian, being in a school that is Christian. Not to say that you have to go to a Christian school, but you have this consistency of community that is Christian. And so when your kids are in that community and pickled in that jar, so to speak, that kind of naturally produces the things that they're looking for in friendships. And so over the course of time, they get to the point where those are the friends they pick. It's also affects like my daughter. Like it was her decision to pick a Christian college, but because of her being pickled in that juice for years and years and years, I think one of the instrumental parts of picking a Christian college was she spent a week at a non-Christian school for art and had never experienced that world before. And really, it was an eye-opener to her about, the stark difference between those in Christ and those not in Christ. And she didn't like it very much. And so
You mean young people at non-Christian schools don't live more or less like Christians?
I know it's a shock to you.
Just
but
the
yes,
artists.
Yeah. I know it's shocking, but so I tend to agree. I think if you can read this and think, oh, I gotta filter my kids' friends, but I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying, the idea of how you raise your kids and how deep they are in their faith turns around and impacts how they pick their friends and their peers. I do believe peers are valuable because I think, you can't miss that point. Once your child gets into a middle school age and they do extracurricular activities, they'll actually spend more time in their school environment than they will with you, because part of the time they spend with you is at night when they're sleeping. So if they play one sport, or if they're in a play, if they're doing something extracurricular, then peers become even more important because they spend more time with them than they do with you. And so but by then they're picking hopefully consistent peers that share their values and beliefs. And ultimately that's how we all pick our friends. That's how we all pick who we want to hang out with, is we look for people who share our values and beliefs. And I think that's important.
There's got to be affinity there, right? You don't pick people as friends that you don't like, generally speaking. You might come to not like them at some point, but
once you get to know them.
Right.
Well, there are always those days.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think that's important. Those are very formative relationships.
And impactful. They'll impact.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the things on the flip side of this is one of the ways we can help our kids is if they do make choices for friends that wind up not being good choices, helping them think through, okay, why is that? What should your response be now? And then what have you learned from this on who you're going to look for in the future? So, I've had this.
And giving them the freedom to pick and choose friends.
Yeah.
To say, you don't have to be everybody's friend and jump through all these hoops to be with this group. Giving them the freedom and telling them it's okay that you're not connecting with this person. It's okay. You can move on. You can do different things. You got to be loving. You got to be Christ-centered. But it doesn't mean you have to hang out with everybody. Or just because this person wants to hang out with you and they don't share your beliefs and values doesn't mean you have to hang out with them. Right. Giving them that freedom and that permission.
Yeah, that's right. So that's good. So we had one example with one of my kids who created this friendship, and this was a girl who was in the homeschool co-op and Christian family, and we had kind of made some connections and that sort of thing. But how do I say it? So again, before we started recording, we had this conversation. Some of the best stuff is before we start recording. Sorry, guys, but sometimes that's the way it is. And so we started talking about some of those parents when we were growing up who really wanted to be cool and sort of relive their glory days as when
Bruce Springsteen sang about them.
Yeah, that's right.
And you really, as you listen to the lyrics to that song, you're like, oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, and those were generally the parents who let you refer to them by their first name. So
or the 55-year-old still wears his Letterman jacket from high school.
Right.
I'm impressed he can wear his Letterman jacket.
Well, he's only wearing one sleeve.
I had one growing up who was like that, and we called him Zeke, and that's what everybody called him, but people his age, but this is the dad, and everybody called him Zeke. So sometimes you run across parents who are trying to relive those middle school, high school years, whatever it is, and of course that causes a lot of problems. And so we kind of had a situation like that where a mom was kind of reverting back to the way she acted when she was in middle school. And so instead of the mom trying to sort of mentor the daughter through not acting the way middle school girls tend to want to act, which is really bad, the mom was kind of fueling it, and so there's all this drama going on. And And there was this constant polarization, like this week I'm in with this person, but not this person, but next week I'm going to be out with you. And, and all that back and forth stuff. And the mom, instead of trying to make it better, was making it worse. And so that's when we had to kind of have that conversation of, okay, so even sometimes within Christian communities,
Yes.
you're still going to run into it. Again, we're far from perfect. And so just because someone is a Christian in a Christian home, and not even just nominally in a Christian home, genuinely in a Christian home, there's still going to be sin there to deal with. And then it becomes the wisdom questions of, what are you going to abide by and work through and put up with? And then at what point do you just say, this is so destructive that I'm not going to be a part of it anymore? And again, I'm not going to be rude. Right. I'm not going to ostracize the way they're trying to ostracize me or other people. That's one of the reasons why we're trying to, one of the problems that we see in all this. But we're going to act lovingly, but we're not going to continue the depth of that relationship anymore because it's doing more harm than good.
Yeah, I'm not going to be held hostage to your erraticism. Almost. If I want to encourage you in any way I can, but
that's where again you go back to Scripture. And so as hard as it is to follow Scripture, you still, in those situations, even when it's, a difficult conversation, you still got to have it, and you still got to be rooted in Scripture.
And the tough part about it too, and this is one of the things that we had to do, is it's easy in those scenarios just to drop out, to say I'm done, and just stop talking to that person. But I think the harder work, but I think the more biblical work, particularly if it truly is within a Christian community, is to talk about what's going on.
Yep.
Here's what I'm observing. This is the way you and I are both supposed to be friends with this other person, but here's how you're treating her. Mm-hmm. Here's the way you're talking about her. Is that a Christian, way to act towards that? A loving way to act towards that person?
And if you teach your kids that early, it's easier as adults.
Yeah.
Because when you become an adult, I think that's one of the hardest things for people today is to have those conversations. Nobody wants to have them.
Yeah.
People just want to drop away or ignore or send an email, but nobody wants to have those. Yet we're commanded by Scripture to have those conversations.
Well, and in a town like Greenville, where we're located, that happens with people in churches as well. Mm-hmm. And it's just easier
to go to a different church.
I got a little frustrated with that person or those leaders or whatever at that previous place, and rather than have a hard conversation, I'll just go down the road to the next place. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, everybody misses an opportunity for sanctification. The people who leave, the people who stay.
I mean, we deal with that at school. I mean, I've been doing schools for 20-something years, and we deal with that at school. In each school I'm part of, you inevitably have a parent coming in who's fleeing someplace else because they're disgruntled. And if we pick up on that, our response is you need to go resolve your issue first, or else you'll bring the issue with you to our school. Yeah. Before we can even talk about admission, you need to go resolve this. You clearly have issues. And so we push them back to the previous school and say, you have to go resolve that biblically. And once you've done that, then we can talk. But if you don't, we'll be having the same issue with you in less than a year.
That's right. Yeah, it comes with you. All right, so we're going to get into some similar ideas here in the next couple questions. How can we build community that is thicker within our homes and churches and wider with small o Orthodox Christians? So, Marty, I'm going to ask you first to define what we mean by small o Orthodox.
So the way Dreher uses small o Orthodoxy, what he would, as I understand it, he'd be describing people that really hold to not Eastern Orthodox, but Orthodox, that is to say, right thinking about the fundamentals of the Christian faith. Mm-hmm. And that there would be, and that there are people in all kinds of churches that would not really be Orthodox. For example, they wouldn't believe the Bible, they wouldn't be trusting Christ for salvation, they wouldn't believe that Jesus is fully God and fully man who died on the cross to atone for sin. And on the other hand, what he's saying is there would be small o Orthodox, there would be genuine Christians in evangelical churches, some in Roman Catholic churches. Of course, he probably sees that more broadly than we do in Eastern Orthodox churches, and that there would also be people in Baptist churches that aren't really Christian. And if you really talk to them, what they believe is not even Orthodox. It's not right thinking. It's not sound Christian doctrine on the basics and the fundamentals of the faith. So small o Orthodox people are the people that really understand they're sinners, that they're saved by grace through faith in Christ, that the Bible is the very Word of God, and they want to walk with Him as a part of His people. And so he uses an example of a group that gets together, and he calls it a small, low Orthodox group of people from different denominational backgrounds, that they still get together, I'm guessing, to read things like Augustine and, early church fathers and talk about those things, because even though some of them are Protestant and some of them are Roman Catholic and some of them are Eastern Orthodox, they would all hold to the fundamentals of the faith.
Which reminds me, for instance, say of what Francis Schaeffer used to do a lot with L'Abri and L'Abri communities, that sort of thing, of just open discussion and inviting everybody in, and people coming with different perspectives from different communities and that sort of thing, and trying to hash out some things together.
And I see that as one of the fundamental issues today, is open discussion. And in open discussion, you're trying to learn from everybody around the table, not trying to convince your neighbor that you're right, which is what I see going on today in the world, is that there is no open dialogue because everybody's thinking they're right and trying to convince the person sitting next to them that they're wrong and I'm right. Instead of, L'Abri was, and I have a good friend who spent some time at L'Abri. It was this open dialogue where Francis and Edith Schaeffer welcomed ideas and didn't condemn ideas, but this ongoing discussion. You went and stayed at L'Abri because you had discussions all day long, all night long, and the whole idea was to pique your conversation with people who are different, to learn more about who God is, because God is God. So I think that is more problematic today, just because of who we are as people, especially in this country where we've become isolated in our own thoughts and our own ideas. And we've built up this social infrastructure, so to speak, where we can isolate ourselves in a corner with our own ideas and never be challenged on those ideas. We've referenced this in the past. We can watch the news that we agree with. We can eliminate people on our Facebook that don't present our views. We can do the same thing on Twitter and Instagram and all these other social media pieces, where we don't have to entertain anything that contradicts what we think at the moment. Well, all that does is it roots you deeper into this dark corner where you're going to wake up one day and realize, that you may be wrong on some things and never entertained other thoughts.
Yeah. So I think you're right. And I think what's important, and what I see, at least in my experience, is if the most that you get of dissenting ideas is just the caricature on Fox News or MSNBC or pick your poison, and I do mean poison, on these different news channels. So you'll, again, on any of those, you're going to hear dissenting ideas. But what you're going to hear is people shouting dissenting ideas at each other. And their goal is not really to share ideas and help people understand. Their goal is to try to win an argument, make myself look good and make you look bad. And really, I'll take it even a step further, demonize the other side.
Yeah, and then get you to click on my website.
Yeah, that's right. And just go into it. So their goal is, so really, if you summarize a lot of these debates on TV, it's you're a demon, no, you're a demon. And it's just them going back and forth on their reasons why they think the other side is terrible.
Which to me, dabbling a little bit in philosophy, I don't understand that mindset, especially at the college level, because that's where it's really dominating, where we shout at the other side and tell them they're a demon, because you're missing half of proper thinking. I mean, if you look at Hegel's dialectic, part of the way you get to truth is you have a thesis, you examine an antithesis, and then you synthesize to produce a new thesis. Well, what you're advocating now is eliminating the antithesis. And my thesis is right. And I often talk to people who think their side is 100% right. And I was like, does that make sense? You think your side has all the answers? In other words, there's no answer that they've gotten incorrect here? And there are people who legitimately think that my side has to win because it has all the answers. But that is so contrary to what proper thinking is and what philosophical thinking is. I mean, so I think, the philosophers of the past, whether they're believers or not, would reject a lot of this because it's just not good thinking.
Yeah. So I think the hope in all of this, at least for me, I'm becoming more and more convinced of this, you're not going to get it from popular sources, TV, social media, internet, whatever. The real work, important work that can be done in this area is actually person to person.
Yeah.
And that can be with your neighbor, your literal neighbor in your neighborhood. That can be with the coworker at the break table. That can be, a lot of different contexts. But really, I think the only way we're going to overcome this increasing polarization that we see in our communities, of course, the ultimate source of that is going to be the Holy Spirit in conjunction with the Word. But that only happens, I think, within the context increasingly now of relationship. It's hard for me if we work together and start to get to know each other and find out we got some things in common. I kind of genuinely start to like you, and then we start to have some discussions about some things that we might disagree on. What's a lot harder for me just to immediately demonize you. Like the culture tends to do, once we built a relationship and I'm sitting there face to face with you at the break table.
I know we're not saying, but let me just say it for anybody we're not saying there's no truth.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not saying that truth is always right in the middle.
Right.
The truth might be closer to one side than the other. And ultimately, where we got to go to evaluate every idea is the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And, what do the scriptures teach? Either explicitly or by, what was the phrase, good and necessary inference. Clearly this is the gist of what scripture's teaching. And so we always have to go back to the scriptures. But I agree that, and I know we're all in agreement on this, is a lot of the tone of the dialogue now is we're seeing people as enemies. And then we're basically wanting to win a debate. And I was talking recently with somebody who'd been having a discussion with a coworker, was kind of asking me some advice about how do you interact with this person. This is what they're saying. But I kind of need to go back to the person and talk to them a little bit, because I can tell probably what they're still trying to do is have a debate and win a debate and show the other person the holes in their argument. And that may be a necessary thing that has to happen at some point. But if the tone of it is, okay, now let's have a contest. You argue your side, I'll argue my side, and I'm going to, it's like a chess game. The whole point of this is for one of us to beat the other one. Well, when we go into that just shuts. So, some people, like I'm going to guess, Craig, you and I probably both like aggressive debate at times. So we might find that fun. Mm-hmm. In the context of whatever that get-together he was talking about was. We might find that fun, but some people don't. That just totally shuts them down. They see it as a personal attack and doesn't help.
Yeah, I agree. I think Schaeffer talked about capital T truth and little truth, right? And but if we believe Scripture, and then sometimes our response is not a response to the person, but our response is the same response Jesus has to us. And sometimes you have to sit back and let people vent, but you have to be Christ to these people, even in your response. And sometimes, like Marty says, vigorous debate is not what they want. They want to vent, and they want to be loved in a different way than they've been loved up until this point. And so sometimes you have to provide that. And having a deep, intimate faith in Christ allows you to navigate those situations more than a superficial one. So,
okay. Last question. Discuss proximity to church and other tangible things we can do to establish and strengthen Christian community. Okay, I'm going to frame this one up with just some honesty that, Craig and I both probably drove 15, 20 minutes to get here to record this at the church today. So considering that that's our context, and we're certainly not the only ones at Fellowship, or really at any of the surrounding churches probably, that have sort of people who are driving past other churches to get to the one they go to. Right. How do we deal with this question of the importance of proximity and how that affects the way we are trying to build some community?
Well, we had a couple over last night from the church, and we were talking about that very issue. Because, their drive was a good 25 minutes to our house, and they're north of here, right? And so how that affects community, and he does reference geography. he does reference that in this chapter, that that's an important ingredient to community. But I think it's not to diminish its importance, but it's maybe less important than it has been in the past because it's everywhere, because everybody lives everywhere else, and so having a church with the neighborhood around it where people walk to church is kind of hard to find these days. It just doesn't happen. Same thing with schools. I mean, I grew up where I walked to school, K through 8. Yeah. That's just not reality anymore. And so that bit of geography, it's like anything else. There are other means to overcome it. And I think those are the things that we have to look for, is those other means. And it may mean that you are on the road 20 minutes to go have community with other people in the church, but may mean that's worth it. It's valuable. But those 20 minutes may mean you can't do something else. So yeah, I think what it does is it makes you. There are choices that have to be made, and we Americans think we can have everything and do everything, and I think that's not the case. And the whole idea of building community. And he says the balance of community. He talked about thick community. Being evangelical, but part of community that's not evangelical. Making sure you have that monastery mindset, and so you cannot be consumed by the community that's not evangelical. But I think the geography part is just inevitable right now.
Well, it struck me. So, in a sense, what he's saying is you need to be present and participating at church. Yeah. Right. If what you're doing is dropping in for an hour a week, you're not going to have community with the people in your church. So I think Craig's right. We live in a day now where people drive a lot of miles to get different things. But it's funny, when we moved here, when we came to fellowship 20-something years ago, and we needed to look for a house. So I did it like any good engineer would look for a house. I took a map, and I put it down. I got my old drafting kit and my compass, and I drew concentric circles around, from the church. And, the tight circle, there were some things, we had 3 children by then, so there was a neighborhood, and we could have lived there and it would have been fine, but it would have been pretty tight squeeze in some houses. And then there were other houses that would have been big enough, but we couldn't afford. So we kind of kept, that circle moved out. And I think about the second or third circle, so for us, that's 10 minutes away. But I think clearly the more you can be participating in the life of the body, and we should want to. We worship morning and evening here at Fellowship. Sometimes people say, do I have to worship in the evening? And it's kind of like, why would we not want to? Yeah. I mean, if there's not something that's actually preventing us, why would we just kind of say, morning's good enough? I've put my time in. I mean, that's not a good thing. And then if we're wanting to be involved in Bible studies, if we're wanting to be involved in gathering for corporate prayer, clearly when you're close by, that's easier. If you're, and so I would say definitely for whenever we move to an area or we're thinking about a church home, I always tell people start with what is closest to you, that is within the framework of what you're looking for. So, obviously if you're a Reformed Presbyterian and there's a Roman Catholic, work right next door to your house, that's not where you're going to be looking. But it might be that there's a really good Reformed Presbyterian option 5 minutes from you. There's another one that there may be things you like more about it 45 minutes away, but you're going to be way more involved in the one 5 minutes away than the one 45 minutes away. And every once in a while, literally, I actually hear about people even here in Greenville that are driving to church in Greenville from other states. And I'm thinking that's got to be that can't work. That's terrible for them, and there's got to be something that's a viable option closer to them than Greenville, South Carolina. So yeah, I think definitely and so it ought to be something that we think about when we're buying a house, or when or maybe for most people, they're probably going to buy the house and then they're going to be looking at what are the options around me. And I think people ought to look, first they ought to look close. They might, for some reason, decide they really need to drive a little bit further. But if I didn't need to drive further, I wouldn't. If I was able to, it's a little different for me because I'm a pastor, but if I retire one day, move somewhere, plop down, I'm looking for a church home, I'll start with what's close and then work my way out.
Well, good. So that'll be then just sort of a final plug, I guess, since we are getting started back. And by the time this makes it to YouTube, we'll have already started back on Wednesday nights and some other activities going on.
Right.
Well, no, actually, Wednesday starts next week. So if this won't make it till the week after that. I got you.
So
we're not supposed to let people know that, are we?
Yeah, we broke the fourth wall just now.
Oh, no. The fact that you referenced breaking the fourth wall, I don't ever want you to call me a nerd. And I hear our producer off camera laughing at the whole fourth wall thing.
Yeah.
And Craig has no idea what we're talking about.
I have no idea. And I'm not sure I want an idea.
Because Craig was a jock. He was a baseball player, an athlete, no idea what the fourth wall is.
So anyway, we need to talk about the Dune trailer that just came out too.
We'll do that off camera.
Yeah, we'll do that once we're done here.
I'll pray for both of you. Okay.
But seriously,
Craig's going to decide we're too nerdy to have community with.
That's right.
He's going to go look for some athletes.
When you
somewhere.
don't see Craig come back next week, guys, this is the reason why. This is the moment. But
Talk
anyway,
to us if you're having trouble, Craig. Talk to us about what you don't like, and we'll work through it.
I will.
Actually, I
happen to know your son is deep into the stuff that we're talking about right now. So
that's even more concerning about both your souls. So
anyway, so final encouragement to everybody. I know it's been a long time. It feels like now. It's definitely been months and months since we've been able to be involved in each other's lives in this capacity at the church. So again, don't want to pressure anybody who feels uncomfortable with COVID or anything like that. But if that doesn't describe you, then please don't let the comfortableness that you've fallen into of not being involved in those things continue into a pattern that winds up becoming bad for your soul.
Right.
And I think, we talk about the importance of Christian community here. It's great for us to be on the phone and on YouTube and other things like that, but it's no substitute to sitting down and having a meal together.
That's right.
Opening up the Word, sitting at the same table together, that sort of thing. So I guess a final encouragement as we finish up talking about community here.
Sure.
Would you mind closing us, please?
Not at all. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the opportunity to study your word. We thank you for your words in Scripture, which command us to live in harmony with one another and to do that in community. Father, thank you for this book and the things that are referenced there. We do pray that as we go our separate ways this morning, Lord, we would glorify you individually and collectively. Again, thank you for the Scriptures which you give us to live by. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.